Hello, and welcome to the Skillful podcast, where we explore DBT and RODBT skills to help you reduce emotional suffering, improve your relationships, and become more present in your life. I'm your host, Marielle Berg, a psychotherapist at the Bay Area DBT and Couples Counseling Center. So welcome, Ed. I'm looking forward to us diving more deeply into the emotion regulation skills today.
Yeah, me too. I like that we have been kind of focusing on the skills that build our emotional resilience and decrease emotional vulnerability. And I think it's great to talk about these kind of really solid foundation of emotion regulation.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about, there's a set of skills that go by the acronym ABC, please. We're going to be talking about the ABC part of that.
Yes. Heavy on the B and C.
Yes. We'll go more into the A in another episode. That deserves its own full episode.
Yes. Yeah. So we had talked recently on the podcast about the A, which is accumulating positive emotions, and went into all the ways on a daily basis, on a regular basis, we can do things that are kind to ourselves, that give us a sense of pleasant activities during the day, as a really important way to build that emotional resilience. That if we have these positive things on a regular basis, it decreases our vulnerability to falling into overwhelming emotion. And one aspect of accumulating positive emotions, which is the A in ABC, is doing things on a regular basis. Another aspect of it is thinking about long-term goals as a way to accumulate positive emotions. So thinking about what we want in our life, what we want our life to be. In DBT speak, what would make our life worth living. And really making sure that we're taking actions on a regular basis that's moving us in that direction, which I think also, much like accumulating positive emotions short term, deserves a nice unpacking. And we are going to do that in a little bit in a few weeks here. But just to kind of mention that the A in ABC is accumulating positive emotions, which has both a short-term and a long-term function.
Yeah. And just to say a bit more about the long-term accumulating positive emotions, that whole skill is really about living a life that is in line with your values. Because if you are living a life that is not aligned with your values, or there are some values that are alive in your life and others are not, it's going to be much harder to be emotionally balanced and to feel happy and satisfied on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think that it's a critical aspect of living a balanced life, is keeping an eye on what is important to me, and are the activities that build that into my life showing up on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Am I doing the things that are going to get me towards the things that are most important to me?
Yes. Yeah. If you love nature and you want to be in nature as much as you can, and you are living life in an urban environment and almost are never around nature or rarely, it's going to make sense that you're going to be feeling more negative or painful emotions more often.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Great example. So the ABC skills in DBT that we're going to go over more in depth today, A stands for accumulating positive emotions, B stands for building mastery, and C stands for coping ahead. And all three of these skills are skills about thinking about the future in a way and planning to do things in the present that will be beneficial to us longer term. And so the B in that skill set is building mastery, which I think is really like a valuable thing to be conscientious about, because it's easy for us to not be paying attention to doing things that increase our sense of accomplishment, our sense of growth, our sense that I am doing things that are helping me improve in one way or another. And that really, that ability on a regular basis to feel a sense that I'm building mastery of important things for me increases that sense of emotional stability.
Yes. And a way to think about building mastery is doing things Ideally, one or maybe more things a day that help you feel more competent, more self-confident, and in control.
Yeah. That feeling like I am doing something to build control in my life is a really valuable thing. That I am focusing on an activity that I have to put effort into. I'm not doing something that's easy. So accumulating positive emotions, doing something pleasant each day, might be a really simple thing. Building mastery is like I got to stretch a little bit. I got to do something that I actually have to put effort into, so that I build that sense of like, oh, if I put effort in, it pays off. I can build my skill set around certain things.
Yeah. So we're really talking about challenging ourselves. And I think there's probably a whole host of reasons why people might shy away from this, but I think a common one is that we can set our goals or our sights too high. And so we wind up doing things that make us want to give up.
Right. So for instance, I had talked recently in our group about trying to build this into my own life, and deciding that after many, many years of enjoying running and being very, very inconsistent with it, as much as I enjoy it, and getting older, so that it's not always going to be such an easy option for me to run, deciding that in the next year, I want to try to run a half marathon, which is for me a pretty big goal. Um, and so that I'm very consciously doing that as a form of building mastery. I want to increase my ability to feel like I can set a goal, I can steadily work towards it, and I can achieve that goal. Using that as a form of building mastery, if I say, I want to run a half marathon and I'm going to do it next week, when right now I'm like running really inconsistently, not very much mileage at all. And all of a sudden I'm going to run 13.1 miles in a week or a month or even 2 months. That's setting myself up for defeat. That's going to be too big of a stretch. I can't go from, running every once in a while, a couple of miles, to running 13.1 miles in a week or a month or a couple of months. Like, I need to build up to it. So if that's my goal and I'm not giving myself adequate time to prepare, this goal is too much of a stretch, then I'm easily going to be frustrated. I'm going to say, see, I can't ever do anything related to running. I don't plan well. This isn't meant to be. I'm not a runner. Why did I even consider that was a possibility for me? It's easy to fall into all that emotion mind kind of thinking.
Yeah. And I think the one about you building mastery by building up your endurance to run a half marathon or any kind of physical challenge, I think is a great one to think about with building mastery, because most of us have had the experience and we can all kind of know that it takes time to build that strength, that endurance. And I think it's harder when it's not so clear cut, when it's a different kind of goal that someone's working towards. I think people set themselves up without even realizing to run that half marathon without training, and then really blame themselves for not reaching that goal.
Right. Right. And I think there are other things that people often talk about as a kind of straightforward way of building mastery. For instance, learning a musical instrument or taking up some sort of craft kind of thing like knitting or sewing that requires steady practice, that it's built in. I can't just say, oh, I'm going to play the flute and pick up a flute and start playing ready for concerts. Then I'm going to have to slowly learn and build over time. And that's really the value in the building mastery skill, is I'm doing something on a regular basis that is building up my skill set, that I get to see my progress.
Yes.
I get to see that I can set a goal and slowly, steadily work towards it and feel that sense of steady progress, which I do think really increases emotional resilience.
Right. And you can look back and say, oh, 3 months ago, I was like, I only knew these notes or could only play this more simple song. And look where I am now.
Right.
And that really helps with, as you're saying, self-confidence, self-esteem. And I'm thinking more in the emotional realm, where I was saying that people might do the equivalent emotionally of, just running a half marathon without training, or trying to pick up the flute and do a magnificent concert without any sort of practice. That for someone who has a real difficulty with asserting themselves, their
Mm,
equivalent of running a half marathon without training might be going in and asking their boss for a raise. Like that's just too much. And so
right,
there might be some building up that needs to be done, or some practice that needs to happen that will build that muscle of self-assertion
right,
before you can do the big thing, like asking
right.
for a raise.
Right. And so, for instance, that's a good example of setting a building mastery goal of I want to be able to ask for a raise. And I have really struggled with that, and I want to be able to do it. The next part of that then would be to say, okay, if I want to ask for a raise, what are the steps I need to take to be prepared for that? And be realistic about those steps. And I think that, like one of the things we talk about with building mastery is increasing the difficulty gradually, slowly over time. So if I want to ask for a raise, what are the steps that I need to do in order to feel confident enough to do it? Because asking for a raise is probably going to be scary no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to get me to the point where I can actually take that risk instead of like, I got to ask for it today, I'm never going to do it.
Yeah. And people are like, well, then forget it. I'm not going to, or look, I tried and it didn't work,
Right.
without realizing that there probably needs to be some practice or training to begin with. And, and when we're thinking about the skill, another piece I want to add is that what is challenging for one person isn't necessarily challenging for another. So when you are thinking about building mastery for yourself, be really careful about not comparing yourself
Mm-hmm.
to someone else and being like, well, it's so easy for them. How come I can't do it?
Right. And it's interesting because I think of that in terms of for myself, like years ago when I really never exercised at all and felt all kinds of shame about the fact that I never exercised and felt really out of shape. The way I started was to walk on a regular basis and spend like a year walking and increasing the distance and time a little bit, but doing it pretty consistently several days a week. And that was like 20 years ago. And I feel so proud of that. Like,
Mhm.
still today, I am living off of the emotional resilience that came from that action, where it was like something reasonable, something that I could do, something I felt really proud of, that I let that sink in over time. Because before I did the walking thing, I was like, I gotta run, I gotta run, I gotta run, right? And I couldn't do it, right? I remember one time going running and just being so miserable. And I didn't run for years after that because I was like, this is terrible. I hate this, right? But I had said, people run, everybody runs, people are supposed to be runners, right? And so I got to run. And when I was able to set a reasonable goal that was a stretch, that felt good for me, like I still feel proud of that. And even now, as I want to kind of get more into running, walking is down, and that's still like really giving me a lot of benefit. So it's thinking about what's reasonable, what's realistic for me, what's going to actually help me to feel proud and not feel like I'm not doing enough or I should be doing more or that's a stupid goal. But no, like really this is what's doable and a good stretch for me.
Yeah. And another piece in terms of doing the skill that's important is to realize that it takes a certain amount of being able to tolerate where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so it may be that, if we're using the walking and running analogy, that walking around the block is building mastery for you on that day. And if you're
Right.
really depressed, maybe getting out of bed and taking a shower is building
Right.
mastery because that's challenging you today.
Right. And it's so hard. And this is where our skill of radical acceptance is so valuable. Because I think, and our skill also of non judgmentalness are so valuable because I think where we can increase our emotional vulnerability is all these self judgments and shoulds. I should be further along than I am. I should be doing more. Someone else or lots of people are doing X. I should be doing that. It's, the judgments I hear all the time. It's pathetic for me not to be doing that, right? And being able to non judgmentally assess where am I at right now and what's a small step in the direction that I want to go to build mastery.
Yes.
Where I am right now is I'm really depressed And it is very hard to take a shower on a regular basis. So taking a shower is going to be my step.
Yeah.
And my ultimate goal is take a shower every day. And that's going to be my thing. And I'm going to use this as a way to start feeling a sense of accomplishment and pride instead of a sense of defeat and self-judgment. And
Yes.
that is a gigantic stretch.
Yeah.
That's actually big and can create so much benefit if we can do it. But if we start with, oh, that's too pathetic, that's like nobody else is doing that, other people are running half marathons, I should be doing whatever, then, like we're not going to be able to take advantage of the benefit this skill has to offer.
Yes. And this isn't officially part of the skill, but I think it can be a piece to add in, is to give yourself kudos or appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
If it is that you took a shower and that's super hard, or you walked around the block, or you tried to be assertive with a friend, whatever it might be, to give yourself a moment to say, yeah, I did something hard.
Right.
Not, I should be able to do so much more.
Right.
And that's reinforcing, I think, in and of itself.
And I think one of the things that can be helpful for this skill is to make a plan. So to say, I would like to be able to do X in this amount of time. So here's my plan on a regular basis to work up to it, because it gives us something concrete to work towards. And I do think it can be a little easier to give ourselves credit when we can check off, oh, I did the thing that I had planned to do.
Yes.
The flip side of that is if we slip and we have a hard time and we're not able to stick to the plan, which often happens, to be able to be gentle and try again. And that's where our mindfulness skill can be so valuable. It's not about sticking to the plan 100%. It's about trying even if I get off the plan.
Yeah. And sometimes maybe you didn't stick to the plan because the activity you planned for yourself was too much. So maybe you need to break it down even more.
Right.
Yeah. So that's building mastery. A kind of simple, maybe, or simple to understand or explain skill, but one that can be super effective in building self-esteem, a sense of competence, and feeling good about yourself.
I think another skill that goes well with that and with the accumulating positive emotion is the C in the ABC skills, which is cope ahead. And so this skill is about recognizing when we are going to be in difficult situations, knowing that's going to be coming up and planning ahead, planning for success, planning for how will we deal with difficulties in the future. So that much like the A and B skills, we're doing some planning to do something in the present that will help me feel positive in the future.
Yes. And so we'll lead you through, there's a bunch of different steps with Cope Ahead, but maybe we should first talk about some examples of situations when you might want to think about using the Cope Ahead skill.
I think a big one that I have used and I hear a lot is visiting family. Because so often we end up visiting family. That's nice and it's great. And family is where all of our idiosyncrasies come into contact with the people who have known those idiosyncrasies the longest. And so there can be friction a lot of times in visiting family. And so knowing like that oftentimes old stuff gets stirred up visiting family, those kinds of things, making a plan. If we're going to be around family, that we know there may be some friction. We know that somebody tends to say the same kinds of things that I find annoying or whatever it might be. Making a plan for what am I going to do that will help me to deal with this, so that I am not caught off guard. I feel like I'm able to be my most self-confident self in that situation. I'm planning for if I do feel overwhelmed at some point, what will I do to soothe myself or to deal with that, so that going into something that could end up being frustrating, I'm feeling a little bit more prepared.
Yes, and the family situation or visiting family of origin is such a big one and a common one. And it makes me think back to when I was training to be a therapist. It was one of my very first classes, and the instructor, who was well into their 60s, said, I've been a therapist for 40 plus years, and I've been teaching for many years, and I go back to my family of origin, and I am a 10-year-old again. all my stuff is backup.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we could say, in any situation where you're gonna maybe feel afraid or threatened or emotionally triggered in some way, those are all great times to think about using this skill.
People use it sometimes like in work situations where it's like certain meetings that you know that you have to have, or interacting with a certain supervisor or coworker that you know is tends to be challenging. If you know in advance this is going to be hard for me, right? That's a perfect time to install some coping ahead strategies.
Yes, and it's also helpful to use if you can anticipate ahead of time that you will be in a situation where you're going to feel a strong urge to engage in a behavior that you're trying to stop, or a target behavior as we refer to it in our skills group. So that's any kind of maybe compulsive or addictive behavior, or behavior where you might want to lash out or run away. You can think about using the skill to help you respond differently.
Right. Lots of possibilities of situations that we know in advance that could be a challenge for me. I tend to struggle in that situation. Let me plan ahead.
Yeah. So the first step of Cope Ahead is describing the situation that's likely to be challenging for you. And so I think it's useful to write it out, to actually spend some time saying, this is the situation, this is who's going to be there, or this is how I might think or feel, or these are what my urges might be. And when you're describing the situation, think about sticking with facts and being very specific.
I think that's an important part of this is like two things that you mentioned. One is taking time to actually, for instance, write it out helps to increase our awareness and increase the importance of this planning. And this is not something I'm doing on the fly. This is something I'm actually devoting some time to. And writing it out is a way to kind of ensure that we're devoting some time. So writing out what it is that we expect to happen and what will be challenging about that. And then the second thing that stood out to me was like being non-judgmental about it, just the facts. And I think it's really good practice instead of, my boss is always saying this and I know that they're going to do it again. It's like, my boss has a tendency to comment on this. I find that challenging. I feel angry and hurt when that happens. I notice a desire to engage in this particular behavior. Just really factually writing out what we're anticipating will happen.
And when you're doing that, also naming some more of the emotions and potential actions that are likely to interfere with you acting as effectively as you want to.
Right. So really naming what are the emotions that I am concerned about? What are the actions, the urges that are probably going to come up that I need to be paying attention to?
Yeah. And then the next step is deciding what coping or problem-solving skills you're going to want to use in the situation. And again, we encourage you to be specific, not just say, oh, I'm just going to deal with my anger, or I'm going to walk it off, but to get pretty specific about what, and to put some details in about what you're actually going to do to help you with your emotions and any kind of urges that you have.
Right. And I do think like thinking specifically about what will I do, so that, okay, if I'm concerned about anger, what will I do when I notice the anger? What actions will I take?
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that I hear people, and I've done this many times myself, saying, I'll just deal with it. That's not actually coping ahead, because there is no plan there. There's nothing specific. It's like, okay, when I notice anger, what I'm going to do is go step outside.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to take a moment to mindfully notice my surroundings as a way to get back into the present moment. And then I'm going to notice my anger and what it is I might want to say.
Yes. Or if it's around a problem urge, I'm going to call, and not just a friend, think about what friend or which friends. Who are you going to reach out to? Is there a chance they're actually going to be available or not? So really kind of thinking through your plan in advance.
And I do think that kind of specificity is what sets us up for the most benefit from this skill. So not just I'm going to call a friend, but I'm going to call this person. And if they're not there, then I'm going to call this person. And if they're not there, then I'm going to call this person, because I've done this many times. I'm going to call this person and then they don't answer. And it's like, well, screw it. I guess I'm going to do whatever I want to do.
Yeah, right.
It's like, no, 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 no. We got plans and backup plans.
Right. Okay, great. Do you want to talk us through the next step of the skill?
Well, I think that one of the things that's really valuable in coping ahead is we sit down, we notice what it is that we're concerned about, what do we anticipate happening, we make a very specific plan for how to deal with it. And then the third step is to take some time to imagine ourselves doing those coping activities.
Mm-hmm. And when you're imagining yourself, it's not as if you're watching a TV show or a movie. It's really putting yourself in or imagining that it's happening now. The way athletes can visualize themselves doing whatever series of movements they want to do as part of their training and sort of mentally preparing themselves. So actually imagining it with as much vividness as you can conjure up. So there's a mental rehearsing that's happening.
Right. And one of the things that this is something that actually athletes and musicians and people who have to do something that's kind of high stress and need to be very specific in what they're doing will use this type of visualization a lot. And it has research has shown that imagining ourselves doing something very vividly as if we're in that moment is just as effective in terms of preparation and like kind of practice as doing the action. So that just imagining it can have the same benefit as if we did it. And so, for instance, for us, if we're coping ahead with a situation that we're not going to be in, I can't be like, okay, well, I'm going to go talk to my boss now and as practice run for coping ahead when it's hard. But we can visualize talking to my boss as if I'm doing it. What am I going to say? How am I going to react? What are the specific things I'm going to do? And that kind of gives us that sense of very vivid practice.
Great. I like the way you describe that. And it's our minds are so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how much, like, for instance, this kind of visualization, which can sound kind of corny, but again, you think about it, it's like really, like this is something very frequently used by athletes, musicians, people who have to do these kinds of things regularly. And it is like visualizing really gives us the benefit of practicing.
And then those folks go into those high stress, high demand situations with that sort of already rehearsed in their mind, and probably gives such a sense of like, I got this.
Right. I've done this.
Yeah.
I've done this before. And I think when we're talking about coping ahead, oftentimes it is a situation that we have been in the past, but we can't necessarily practice in the same way somebody can, for instance, practice doing particular jumps in figure skating or whatever. And so for us, it is a chance to really get that practice in, visualize ourselves following through with our plan. Mm-hmm. Put together that coping ahead plan and visualize following through with it. And then the last step is to really practice relaxing afterwards, so that we do the visualization of coping in the situation, and then we practice relaxing so that we're giving ourselves that sense of reward of like, I've got this, I can handle this, I'm going to feel more relaxed when this is done. And we're building that awareness in as well.
Yes, because it can be stressful what we're asking you to do with the skill is to put yourself in that hard situation mentally. And so the relaxing after, I think, is really important to bring you back to the present moment. It isn't actually happening, to settle your nervous system.
That's it. Like I'm okay. And letting that sink in helps us in the present and will help us when we get into the situation that we're planning for.
Mm-hmm. So when we go over this skill in our groups, we have people actually write out their situations in detail and describe in detail how they're going to cope. And then we have them kind of close their eyes and actually visualize it. So this might be a little more challenging to do on your own, but you certainly can try it out.
And I do think this process of, number one, write down what is the situation and what are my concerns? What is it that I need to be coping ahead? Number two, what's my specific plan for how to cope? Number three, imagine it and rehearse it, practice it, and then relax. And just going through that, taking some time to sit down and going through that process can really make a huge difference and make it a little less intimidating when we have to go into the situation that we're coping ahead for, and feel a little bit more prepared.
Yeah, I think it's really honoring that for all of us, challenging situations in order to get through them effectively often need some preparation. And that thinking we're just going to wing it can sometimes be a setup for it to not go very well.
Right. And that's where we can't anticipate every challenging situation. And some challenging situations we know. We know this is going to be hard. So putting some effort into planning ahead actually sets us up to have a better experience than if we just show up and see what happens.
Okay, so that's the B and the C, and we did a little bit of the A of the ABC please skill. And we'll get to the please in a subsequent episode.
Yes.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah, thank you.
In the beginning portion of this episode, Ed and I reference the A in the ABC acronym, and we've already recorded and released episodes that talk about accumulating positive emotions in both the short term and the long term. So I wanted to point listeners in that direction in case you want to listen to those episodes. So episode 17, which is pleasant events, is all about accumulating positive emotions in the short term. And episode 19, which is about your values, focuses on accumulating positive emotions in the long term. And also, if you're benefiting from this podcast, we'd love if you could rate and review us in iTunes. It really helps spread the message about DBT and mental health in general. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening to today's episode. To learn more, or if you're in the Bay Area and want to get started with therapy, you can find us online at bayarea.dbtcc.com. That's bayarea.dbtcc.com.